Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. This year, the NATO alliance is 70 years old. Is it time now to shut down this Cold War relic? Also, liberal media can't say sorry and choke on Russiagate. Cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest, Dmitry Babich in Moscow. He's a political analyst with Sputnik International. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He is the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Marcus, I want to talk about NATO, and I'm going to use the words of NATO from the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, and he addressed Congress last week. It was a real spectacle, and I'm going to ask you and Dima to reflect upon it. So let's go to this. We do all this not to provoke a conflict, but to prevent conflict and to preserve peace. Not to fight, but to deter. Not to attack, but to defend. How do you react to that, Marcus? Go ahead.
Well, NATO is an offensive, criminal and degenerate organization that is the root cause today of instability in the Balkans and in Eastern Europe. In essence, where you find NATO, you find instability and societal degeneration. The Americans have used NATO over the last 30 or so years to achieve global dominance, and they continue to use NATO, not just to maintain their global dominance, but to enhance their global dominance. And who has NATO worked with over the last 3 decades or so in order to achieve the objectives set before it by America? Well, NATO has worked with organized crime, extremists, and terrorists. NATO bombed Serbia for 78 days in support of the so-called Kosovo Liberation Army, which was and remains today, in a different manifestation, one of the largest and deadliest organized crime networks in the world. Indeed, Kosovo today is a major international hub for gun, drug and human trafficking. In Libya, NATO bombed Libya in support of Al-Qaeda. And today, Libya is a failed state with swathes of Libyan territory controlled by both Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And also, Peter, in Tripoli today, there are human slave markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And Marcus, we also had the head of NATO speaking to Congress, specifically focusing in on Russia. And let me go to Dima here, again, quoting Stoltenberg. There is no contradiction between defense and dialogue. We do not want to isolate Russia. We strive for a better relationship with Russia. But even without a relationship, we still need to manage a difficult one. How do you react to that?
Well, first, according to the Stockholm Peace Institute, Stockholm Institute on the Issues of Peace, Russia's defense spending is 27% of the defense spending of NATO's European allies. And the spending...
But if you were to put in the United States, what would be the percentage?
Well,
Less than 10%.
The United States spends, I guess, about 14 times more than Russia, right? So who is going to, again, to attack whom, you know? There was no precedent in history, not even Alexander the Great attacked an army that would be at least 18 times bigger, right? Second, what are the plans of NATO? It's not Russia sending its ships to the shores of, I don't know, France or Britain. And when 3 Russian ships recently went to the North Sea, you remember the UK Defense Secretary said that we will not tolerate any aggression, you know. One of these ships
it's open seas, right?
It's open seas. It's hundreds of miles from the UK. And now we have a group of NATO ships, 20 ships and 2,200 servicemen entering Odessa. Odessa is
But Ukraine isn't a member of NATO.
Yes, but Ukraine is even more belligerent towards Russia than NATO.
So what business does NATO have there?
This is something that people in the West did not notice. The Ukrainian President Poroshenko said he's going to point missiles at Moscow, that he's going to redevelop the old Soviet missile potential that Ukraine had, and this would create a totally new situation, very tense. But Odessa is a legend for Russia. 50% of Russia's 20th century writers, classical 20th century writers, are from Odessa. This is a Russian-speaking seaport in the south of Ukraine, and you have 20 NATO ships entering it, preparing for military exercise, and we have Mr. Stoltenberg and other NATO chiefs.
NATO's argument always is that they're projecting stability. Is this projecting stability?
Well, they have a very tricky way of projecting stability. They promise to force the way for Ukrainian ships to the Azov Sea, despite Russia's resistance.
What geopolitical interest does NATO have in that sea?
Azov Sea is not a deep sea, you know, only small vessels can enter it. Actually, there is a bridge connecting Crimea to the rest of Russia, so the NATO ships, if they want to force their way from there, they will have to pass under that bridge, you know, following the Ukrainian
ships. And that bridge has geopolitical importance to Russia.
Yeah. But the reason why it was built is very simple. The Ukrainian government several times allowed electricity to be cut to Crimea, despite a contract between Crimea and Ukraine on you know, delivering electricity to Crimea. In the Soviet times, the whole energy system was unified. So, and these are just two examples. There are other examples in the United States.
Let me go back to Stoltenberg's words here. Let me go back to London here. Marcus, I'm going to continue with the address, the very unusual address for a NATO head to give to a joint session of Congress here. We do not want an arms race. We do not want a new Cold War, but we must not be naive. An agreement that is only respected by one side will not keep us safe. I find that really remarkable here. I mean, who's acting unilateral in these cases here? Go ahead in London.
Yes, absolutely. It is NATO that has extended to Russia's western borders. It is NATO that is attempting to place a cordon sanitaire on Russia's western borders. I don't see a Russian-led military alliance on America's borders. Indeed, only recently, some Russian soldiers arrived in Venezuela at the request of the Venezuelan government. And look at the response of Washington to that development. But it's perfectly acceptable in the minds of American policymakers for NATO to be on Russia's western borders, for there to be an American missile system in Romania and in Poland, which is aimed at Russia's strategic nuclear deterrent. And of course, Ukraine is the missing piece in the jigsaw for America, because ever since the 1990s, the Americans have been lusting after Ukraine. Should Ukraine join NATO, then of course, Russia will be encircled on its western borders, and NATO aircraft operating from Ukraine could reach Moscow in 20-25 minutes. So that is a very, very crucial
5 minutes.
It's very close, you know. It's just a few hundreds of miles away from Moscow. Missiles, it would take them about 3 minutes. So this is the reason why Russia said it was a red line, NATO membership for Ukraine. And this is precisely the reason why the Ukrainian President Poroshenko included it in their constitution.
But the argument NATO always makes is that these are sovereign countries and they have the right to be in military alliances. But the flip side of that is, looking at it from Russia's point of view, is that your expansion is creating instability and a threat to our security. They never look at how the country that is being targeted, how they see things. They used to do that during the Cold War. They don't do it anymore.
Well, if they are so concerned about countries being free to choose their alliances, why is the United States Congress working on a law on preventing the Russo-Venezuelan threat to the United States, just because a few Russian servicemen arrived to Venezuela quite legally on two planes?
They have diplomatic relations. They're both members of the United Nations.
Well, American servicemen are in Ukraine on constant basis. They train the Ukrainian troops, which destroy the Russian-speaking population of Donbass in the east of Ukraine. Basically, the reason why the Ukrainian situation is so dangerous is because President Poroshenko pushed it in the parliament. They included the aspiration to join NATO in the Ukrainian constitution. So even if Poroshenko loses the election,
right,
the threat will persist.
We have to keep in mind that the public opinion polls before the coup in 2014, the public was against NATO membership. Let me go back to Marcus.
And don't trust the public opinion polls after the coup.
Well, yeah. Let's go back to Marcus in London. We're missing a key element here, and I think you'll get it when I'm again quoting the Secretary General here. Our desires for a peaceful world is simply not enough. We must act and invest to make it so NATO allies must spend more on defense. Well, give me a drum roll. If that's what it's all about, the military-industrial complex, you got to bring them to the trough to feed. Go ahead in London.
Yes, well, anyone can talk about having a peaceful world. Indeed, Adolf Hitler spoke about having a peaceful world. But of course, the kind of peaceful world that NATO and, of course, America is talking about is a world in which America is dominant and Russia is subservient. Of course, for the Americans, they would relish the opportunity to go back to the 1990s when Russia had a pro-Western president and Russia was on its knees. And when NATO talks about respecting the sovereign decisions of government, the decisions of sovereign governments, well, they didn't respect President Yanukovych's decision in late 2013 to turn economically to Russia. Because what did they do a few months after that? They carried out a coup against President Yanukovych. So their proclamations to respect democracy and the decisions of sovereign governments aren't worth the paper they're written on.
Okay, we're going to go to a short break in a second here. Dima, when we get back, we're going to talk about Russiagate and its implications and how the media cannot say sorry. I want to thank Marcus Papadopoulos in London for joining us. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our real news coverage. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. And now to Athens, where we have Alex Christophori. He is the director and writer for theduran.com. Welcome to the program, Alex. Let's talk about how the media can't say sorry and is essentially choking every single day, every succeeding day after the report was filed, and we got the 4-page summary from Attorney General Barr. I mean, it's pathetic comes to mind. It's sad, and it's dangerous because you have a liberal media that is in denial and in a deep, deep denial, and they continue to fight back with no results. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, this is Peter. This is the worst election hangover defeat in history. I mean, we're 3 years now, 2 years from the election, 3 years of this Trump-Russia collusion hoax. And that's what it is. It's a hoax. It was a hoax from the beginning. It's been proven a hoax. Barr specifically says there was no collusion. He is not recommending that Mueller is not recommending any more indictments. It's over. Okay, release the 400 pages, fine. No one in their right mind expects to see anything different. I'm sure the mainstream media and the Democrats will nitpick and they'll find a few items to keep this narrative going just a little bit longer. But Peter, they're running on fumes at this point. And we all saw what happened the day after Barr released his summary, what happened to the ratings of Rachel Maddow, of CNN, of MSNBC. Tucker Carlson in his 1-hour show got more viewers than all of CNN combined. That means a significant amount of people, mostly I would guess independent voters, who were buying into this narrative for 2-3 years that Trump colluded with Russia, checked out of Rachel Maddow's show. They checked out of CNN, of Cuomo, of Don Lemon, of Brian Stelter. They checked out, which shows that this hoax is not believed anymore. And my guess, it's not believed by a large chunk of independent voters, and that benefits Trump.
Okay, Dima here, but you know we had CNN come out and publicly congratulate itself for its coverage, and then we have Pulitzer Prizes that came out and praised journalists for their investigation of collusion But there's no collusion, so I suppose those prizes should be returned?
I think that I should quote how and why this Pulitzer Prize was handed, $15,000, how it was handed to the journalists of the New York Times and the Washington Post. It was handed for deeply sourced, relentlessly reported coverage in the public interest that dramatically furthered the nation's understanding of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and its connections to the Trump campaign. So this is the moment, its connections to the Trump campaign. If I were the American public, I would demand my $15,000 back. And these people, they should pay more. We Russians, we don't have this expression, but they stole the time of millions of viewers with their stories that, as Peter Van Buren rightly writes in The American Conservative, conflated the indictment and the guilty verdict, breached all rules of journalism, basically pushing the editorial agenda on the viewers and the readers. And I think these people who got the prize, they should be named now. They are Maggie Haberman, Joe Becker, Matt Apuzzo, Mark Mazzetti, and Rosalind Helderman, Tom Hamburger, Ellen Nakashima, Adam Antus, and Greg Miller. We want our money back from these people. I think that should be the slogan from the American public.
But we saw Glenn Greenwald talk with Cenk Uygur over at Young Turks here. It's a fascinating discussion. They're both very intelligent guys, both media savvy as well here. But Glenn Greenwald took him to the cleaners, annihilated him on his own program. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, and it's worthy to point out, Peter, that they're both very anti-Trump. They're both, you know, standing on the liberal left side of things. But Greenwald was right from the beginning. Peter, this show, you were right. We were right from the very beginning. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that Trump is not an agent of Russia or of Putin. I mean, it's when you step back and you say it a couple of times, you realize just how ridiculous and how absolutely stupid the whole premise is. But people bought into it. And now you see people like Cenk Uygur, he's trying to move the goalposts a little. Yep. So, you know, now they're starting to say it's not so much that we believed there was collusion, or maybe not even obstruction, but now we got to look into his finances. You know, Trump did business dealings with Russians.
But Alex, there's a caveat there. They did look into the business connections of Paul Manafort, okay? So they didn't do that. The primary target of this investigation, they didn't do that with Trump. I mean, that is moving the goalpost.
Yeah, it's an absolutely ridiculous premise to believe that Mueller is going to investigate all the finances of Paul Manafort, who was working, by the way, we've said it 1,000 times,
with Ukraine,
working on behalf of the EU and on behalf of Obama to move Ukraine away from Russia. He was not working with Russia and with Putin. But it beggars belief to think that they're going to investigate all the finances of Manafort, but Trump's finances, we're just going to, you know, not touch those, just leave them as they are.
Okay, but Dima, what you got, the instant reaction is that there's a cover-up going on. A cover-up, and A.G. Barr must be involved in it. Mueller might be involved in it. I mean, but this is a symptom of just what is wrong with the media right now, because the media, they want a conclusion. They don't work towards a conclusion using evidence. This has been such an abrogation of responsibility. This is pure malpractice, and it has a price, because as Christopher was just pointing out here, the faith in the media is being destroyed.
Absolutely.
Has been destroyed.
Well, basically, the talk about the cover-up started immediately. We had Rachel Maddow and we had the New York Times. What was their editorial? No collusion, no exoneration. So they kept saying that there was no exoneration, no exoneration. They kept attacking Trump. But what I'm concerned about in this whole story, there are two things. First, you know, this nothing burger continued for 2 years.
It's continuing, and it's continuing.
The Iraqi nothing burger, as we know, continued for about a year. In a year after the American invasion, in 2004, the New York Times published a kind of self-rebuke, like there was no weapons of mass destruction, but still the world is better without Saddam Hussein, you know, all that garbage. This is the first thing. The second thing is just how the whole story can be built on nothing, you know. Yeah. On nothing. You just repeat certain words without any evidence, and you get Pulitzer Prize for that.
But Alex here, I mean, it's something you and I have talked about almost on a daily basis, is that the other shoe has to drop here. And I think by continuing this nonsense of there must be a cover-up, Barr is in on it, blah, 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 all this hot air, like we've heard for 2.5 years. But there are and should be investigations into Maine Justice, the FBI, and even the CIA. And we all know the names, okay? And the way the media is acting is if that never happened and never should be looked into. This is another different kind of cover-up, different kind of hoax conspiracy. Go ahead in Athens.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there are now enough dots to connect so that there are people that we know that did commit real crimes. Unfortunately, for the mainstream media and for the Democrats, those crimes are not around Trump or Trump's campaign. And we are starting to see some investigation from some people. You have, people like John Solomon, Sarah Carter, Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald. These are people who will, I think, connect some dots. And of course, you have Barr now, who's a much better AG than Sessions ever was. And I think I think he will pursue some things. Will he get the big fish? No, I don't think so. I think there's going to be some people, whether you start with Hillary Clinton, who did collude to rip off Bernie Sanders from the primary election victory, which no one mentions.
Do you think that we will ever get the full story of the origins of the dossier? I mean, the details of it here, because we have a lot of suppositions, a lot of claims, and there's some contradictory suppositions out there. But if we can get to the origins of the dossier, then we get to the origins of the hoax. Go ahead, Alex.
I don't know. I think we kind of know that the dossier originated with Brennan. I think we know that McCain played a key role, but we don't know.
But their knowledge of its lack of authenticity, bringing it to a FISA court, because that's really the ground zero of all of this here. And then there'll be culpability. People have lied. Lack of candor. That is a felony, and it should be prosecuted. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think Dima is right. I think very much like Iraq and WMDs, I think we'll have maybe some admissions a year or two down the line, but I don't think we're ever going to get the full truth. I don't think we're ever going to have someone come out and say, you know what, this was a pure work of fiction. This entire dossier was completely false. We haven't even seen Christopher Steele, Peter.
Yep.
Have you ever seen Christopher Steele appear on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News anywhere? I haven't. And he's the main character.
I've never seen a president so hated, more than Nixon. I remember that. I was young, but I do remember it. And so the people that hate this president the most has given him the greatest re-election gift conceivable.
Yes. Go ahead. Well, there is a conspiracy theory in Russia that the whole thing was actually started by secret Trump supporters who decided to make the Democrats look like complete idiots. But there's also another conspiracy theory. Let me quote from Peter Van Boren in The American Conservative about Rachel Maddow. Anyone with a Russian surname had ties to Putin for her, had connections to Russian intelligence. So the popular joke in Russia is that Rachel Maddow's grandfather's surname was Medvedev. So she's connected to the Russian Prime Minister Medvedev, and that means she's in the center of Russian intelligence. And that provides us with more reasons to publish the Mueller report and see what is behind the scenes.
Alex, for our last 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Peter, I think the main conclusion, when it's all said and done, and for everyone that's watching this, is that much of the mainstream media, not all of the media, but much of it lies. They lied about WMDs. They lied about Libya. They lied about Syria. They're lying right now about Venezuela.
And Ukraine.
And they lied about this Mueller report. Let's not forget, was it not Brian Stelter, Peter, I think 6 months ago, that was saying Avenatti is going to be the next president of the United States?
Okay. I want to point out, before we leave here, I want to point out that the Duran is doing a great job in covering these stories. The Duran has always been right. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow, Athens, and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.